The old shop always smelled of cedarwood, oil, and time itself. For 60 years, the gentle chorus of ticking clocks has been the soundtrack to my life, each one a heartbeat, a memory. But the silence that fell upon the room when Mayor Thompson walked in was a different kind of silence. It was heavy, cold, the kind that precedes a storm. He was my apprentice once, a boy named Leo with bright eyes and clever hands. I taught him how to mend the delicate soles of timepieces. Now he stood before me, not as Leo, but as the mayor, his expensive suit a shield against the past, his smile a well-polished tool. He didn't come to talk about the old days. He came with a thick, glossy folder. "Arthur," he began, his voice smooth as polished marble, "the council has approved the downtown revitalization project. We're building the future." He slid a document across my counter, a notice of compulsory purchase. My shop, the heart of this town's history, was to be demolished for a glass and steel plaza. "It's progress, Arthur. You of all people understand that time must move forward." I looked at him, the boy I once taught that every gear, no matter how small, has a purpose. He wasn't just taking my shop, he was trying to erase the memory of what it stood for. I simply nodded, my gaze falling upon the grand clock in the corner, the one I built for the town's centenary, the one whose heartbeat has measured every joy and sorrow this town has ever known. He saw my silence as weakness. I saw it as the winding of a spring. Before we continue this journey, if you believe in the power of stories that teach us about life, consider subscribing. This isn't just a channel. It's a quiet place to reflect and grow stronger together. He cleared his throat, impatient. "You have 30 days, Arthur. I trust you'll be reasonable." I finally met his eyes, and for a fleeting moment, the mayor was gone. And I saw the boy, Leo, looking for approval. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the cold ambition of a man who had forgotten the value of things that cannot be bought. After Leo left, the silence he'd shattered slowly pieced itself back together, not with the familiar comforting ticks of my clocks, but with the loud, echoing beat of my own heart. I ran a hand over the surface of my workbench, its maple wood worn smooth as riverstone by my father's hands, and then by mine. Every nick, every stain, every faint scratch was a line in a story. Here was the deep gouge where I, as a boy of 10, had let a chisel slip while trying to carve my initials. Here was the faint, circular stain from 100,000 cups of tea my wife Eleanor would bring me in the afternoons. This shop wasn't just a place of business, it was the archive of my life. My father, a man of few words and impossibly steady hands, believed that a watchmaker did not just fix machines. "We are keepers of moments, Arthur," he would say, his voice barely a whisper above the ticking. "A person's watch holds their most precious seconds, their first love, their last goodbyes. You must treat it with the respect of a confessor." He passed that belief to me, and I tried to pass it to Leo. I remember the day he first walked in here, no older than 12, all restless energy and a mind as quick as an escapement wheel. He was an orphan, living with an aunt who had too little time and even less patience. He saw the tiny, intricate worlds under my loupe and was mesmerized. For years, this shop was his sanctuary. He'd sit at the apprentice's bench for hours, his youthful exuberance slowly giving way to a focused calm. I taught him everything my father taught me. I showed him how the sun and moon gears of an orrery clock dance in their celestial ballet, how to listen to the whisper of a mainspring to know its tension, how to find a single misplaced jewel that could silence a grandfather clock. He had the gift. His hands were steady, his mind sharp. I saw in him not a son, but a successor to the legacy, a keeper of moments. But as he grew, the world outside this shop began to call to him more loudly. The patient, quiet work of our craft started to feel too slow for his ambition. He went to college, studied law, then politics. He spoke of progress, of modernization, of a future that had no room for the slow, deliberate pulse of the past. Each time he visited, he seemed a little more distant, his words a little more polished, his eyes a little less bright. He had traded the intricate craft of mending time for the coarse art of bending people to his will, and now he wanted to tear down the very place that had built him. My gaze drifted back to the centenary clock. It stood nearly 9 feet tall, its mahogany case glowing with a deep red warmth. My father and I built it together, his last great work. Everyone in town knows the clock. Its chimes mark the hours of our lives, but no one knows its secret. On the day of its dedication, my father took me aside. "Towns, like people, can forget who they are, Arthur," he whispered, pressing a small, ornate brass key into my palm. "Politicians come and go, their promises fade, but this town was founded on a promise." He showed me a hidden panel inside the clock's base, a compartment he had crafted with the skill of a master cabinet maker. Inside, resting on a bed of velvet, was the town's original charter, a document penned by the founders. It was more than just a piece of paper, it was a covenant. It contained a clause, long forgotten by the modern world of legal loopholes, a clause that consecrated the original town square and its historical buildings, my shop included, as a permanent trust for the people, protected from the fleeting ambitions of any single generation. "This clock does not just tell the time," my father had said. "It holds our time. It is the town's memory." For 50 years, that key had sat in a small, lacquered box in my desk drawer, a silent promise between a father and a son. Leo, with his talk of the future, had forgotten that the future is built upon the foundations of the past. He saw my shop as a roadblock to his glass plaza. He had forgotten that it was, in fact, the very cornerstone of the town. I walked to my desk, my steps suddenly feeling lighter. I opened the drawer and picked up the small box. Lifting the lid, the brass key gleamed in the dim light. I held it in my palm, its cold weight a comfort, a purpose. Leo wanted a fight in a courtroom with his lawyers and their polished words, but I would not meet him there. I would meet him here, in the heart of time itself. The next morning, I did not go to my workbench. Instead, I put on my good tweed coat, the one Eleanor always said made me look like a professor, and walked out into the crisp morning air. The town was just waking up, the smell of fresh bread from Mrs. Gable's bakery mingling with the damp scent of dew on the cobblestones. My first stop was not a lawyer's office, but the town library. It was a quiet, hallowed space, run by a woman named Clara, whose grandfather's pocket watch I had restored just last year. It was a beautiful, intricate piece, a repeater that chimed the hours with the delicate sound of tiny silver bells. When I had returned it to her, she had wept, not for the mechanism, but for the memory it held of her grandfather reading to her on a Sunday afternoon. Clara was behind the main desk, her silver hair tied in a neat bun, her eyes bright behind her reading glasses. "Arthur, what a pleasant surprise," she said, her voice a warm whisper that suited the room perfectly. "Don't tell me my grandfather's watch has stopped singing already." "No, Clara. It sings as beautifully as ever," I assured her. "I came today not as a watchmaker, but as a historian of sorts. I need to look at the town archives, specifically the records from the centenary celebration 50 years ago." Her brow furrowed with curiosity, but she asked no questions. She led me to a small, climate-controlled room in the back, its shelves lined with heavy, leather-bound ledgers. "It's all here," she said. "Let me know if you need anything." "No." For hours, I sat at a heavy oak table, the only sound the soft rustle of turning pages. I wasn't looking for legal precedents. I was looking for stories. I found the records of the clock's dedication, the speeches given, the names of the families who had donated to its construction. I found photographs of the town square filled with people, their faces turned up in awe as the clock chimed for the first time. My father was in one of the photos, a younger man with my eyes, standing beside the clock, his hand resting on its base, a look of quiet, profound pride on his face. But I also found something else, tucked away in the minutes of the town council meetings from that year, a proposal almost identical to Leo's for a modernization of the town square. It was put forth by a developer from the city, promising progress and prosperity, and it was vehemently rejected. The records detailed the public outcry, the letters from shopkeepers, the speeches from residents, who argued that the town's character was its greatest asset. The final vote was unanimous, to preserve the historic heart of the town for all future generations. Leo wasn't the first to have this idea. He was just the first to do it with such disregard for the town's own declared will. My next visit was to Mr. Henderson, the retired postmaster. He was a man whose life was measured in the steady rhythm of sorting mail, a human clock of sorts. I had repaired the old regulator clock in the post office for him years ago, a task that had taken me a month of patient work. He now lived in a small cottage with a garden full of roses. I found him tending to them, his hands, though gnarled with age, still gentle. "Arthur," he said, his voice raspy but kind, "to what do I owe the honor?" "I came to ask you a question, Henry," I said, getting straight to the point. "You've seen more of this town's comings and goings than anyone. What do you hear about the mayor's new plaza?" He sighed, snipping a dead rose from its stem. "People are unsettled," he admitted, not meeting my eye. "They talk about it in whispers. Leo's promising jobs, a new future, but he's also asking people to sell homes their families have lived in for a century. He's been persuasive." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were troubled. "My neighbor, old Mrs. Gable from the bakery, she was visited by the mayor's assistant last week. They offered her a fraction of what her property is worth. When she refused, they mentioned that the health inspector might find her old ovens aren't up to the new, modern code. She's terrified, Arthur. She thinks she'll lose everything." There it was. This wasn't just about my shop. Leo wasn't just a progressive mayor, he was a bully, using threats and intimidation disguised as civic improvement. He was targeting the oldest, most vulnerable members of our community, the very people a mayor should protect. My fight was no longer just for a building of wood and brick. It was for the soul of our town, for the quiet dignity of people like Mrs. Gable. I left Henry's cottage with a new weight on my shoulders, but also a new fire in my heart. The key in my pocket suddenly felt heavier, its purpose clearer than ever. Leo had forgotten that a town is not a collection of buildings to be bought and sold. It is a community of souls, a tapestry of interconnected lives, a clockwork of memories. And I, the quiet watchmaker, was about to remind him that every single gear matters. I began with the photographs from the library. I spent the next few days in my shop, not repairing clocks, but carefully restoring these old images, bringing the faded faces of the past back into focus. With Clara's permission, I made high-quality copies. Then I started a new ritual. Every morning I would place a single, beautifully framed photograph in my shop window. The first was the one of my father, standing proudly beside the centenary clock. Beneath it, a small brass plaque simply read, "Thomas, the town watchmaker, 1975. He believed a town's heart beats in its history. The next day I added another, a picture of the town square, bustling with families during that same celebration. The plaque read, "Our town square, 1975. A place for people, not just for profit." I didn't add any words of protest, no mention of the mayor or his plaza. I just let the images speak for themselves. And people began to notice. At first it was just a few curious glances. Then people started to stop. They would stand for a moment, their reflections mingling with the ghosts in the photographs. I saw older residents pointing, their faces softening with recognition. I saw younger parents stopping to show their children what the town used to look like. Mrs. Gable from the bakery came by, her eyes lingering on the photo of the square. "I remember that day," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "My father lifted me onto his shoulder so I could see the clock. It felt like the whole world was celebrating with us." She looked at me, a silent understanding passing between us. She didn't mention the health inspector. She didn't have to. My next step was more direct, but just as quiet. I took out the list of families who had contributed to the clock's construction 50 years ago. Many of the names were still prominent in town: Henderson, Gable, Thompson. Yes, Leo's own grandfather, a stonemason, had helped build the clock's foundation. I began to visit them one by one, not as a protester, but as the town watchmaker, the keeper of moments. I brought with me a small velvet-lined box. Inside, I had placed one of the original tiny brass gears from the clock's mechanism, a piece I had replaced during a recent cleaning. I went to see Leo's aunt, the woman who had raised him. She was a frail woman living in the same small house where Leo had grown up. I presented her with the small gear. "I wanted you to have this," I said gently. "It is a piece of the clock your own father helped to build, a piece of our town's legacy." She held the tiny, intricate wheel in her trembling palm, her eyes filling with tears. "My brother was so proud of that clock," she whispered. "He said it was the one thing he built that would outlast him." We spoke for an hour, not about politics or plazas, but about her brother, about a young Leo who loved to take things apart just to see how they worked. As I left, she clutched the gear to her chest. "Leo has been so busy," she said, a hint of sorrow in her voice. "Sometimes I think he's forgotten where he comes from." The atmosphere in the town began to shift. The whispers Henry Henderson had told me about were starting to find a voice, not in anger, but in nostalgia. The photographs in my window had become a silent gathering place, a focal point for a shared memory that Leo was trying to erase. People started talking not about the promise of new jobs, but about the value of what they already had. They were remembering, and I knew that a memory, once awakened, is a powerful force. It was like the slow, steady ticking of a clock, a sound you can ignore for a while, but one that sooner or later commands your attention. I hadn't filed a lawsuit or held a protest, but I had wound the mainspring of the town's conscience, and I could feel the tension beginning to build. The bell above my shop door chimed on a Thursday afternoon, a sharp, impatient sound that was out of sync with the room's gentle rhythm. It was Leo. He didn't have his glossy folder this time, nor his polished smile. His face was tight, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He closed the door with a little too much force, and the old clocks on the walls seemed to shudder in response. He surveyed the window display, his eyes narrowing at the collection of photographs that had grown day by day. It was now a silent testament to the town's shared history, a gallery of ghosts he wished would stay buried. "What do you think you're doing, Arthur?" he asked, his voice low and strained. He paced the narrow space between the counter and a glass display of pocket watches, his expensive shoes clicking impatiently on the worn floorboards. I continued polishing the crystal of a small mantel clock, my movements slow and deliberate. "I am a watchmaker, Leo. I am tending to things that hold time." "This is not about time," he snapped, gesturing angrily toward the window. "This is about obstruction. You're stirring up trouble, making people sentimental over things that are gone. This town needs to move on. That's what I was elected to do." I set down my polishing cloth and looked at him. I saw not a mayor, but the boy who once broke the mainspring of a beautiful French carriage clock because he was too impatient to unwind it properly. "Tell me, Leo," I said, my voice as calm as ever. "If you take apart a clock, throw away half its gears because you deem them old, and then reassemble it, does it still tell time, or is it just a hollow case with a handsome face?" He stopped pacing and glared at me. "This isn't one of your riddles, Arthur. This is reality. It's about economics, about investment, things you wouldn't understand." "I understand that a thing without a memory has no soul," I replied softly. "A town that erases its history has no future. It has only a sterile, ticking present, counting down to nothing. You talk of progress, but you are breaking the mainspring of this community." His face flushed with anger. "I am trying to save this town, and you, with your dusty pictures and your metaphors, you are standing in the way. Take them down, Arthur. Take the pictures down and accept the generous offer. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." It was a threat, thinly veiled but unmistakable. It was the same pressure he was applying to Mrs. Gable and the others. The bell above the door chimed again, this time a softer, more pleasant sound. The door opened and Sarah Gable walked in. She is Mrs. Gable's granddaughter, a bright young woman in her 30s who took over the family bakery a few years ago and turned it into the most popular spot in town, blending her grandmother's traditional recipes with a modern touch. She was the very image of the future Leo was always talking about. She smiled warmly at me. Then her eyes flickered toward the mayor. Her smile did not fade, but it lost its warmth. She offered him a polite, cool nod, then turned her full attention back to me, effectively dismissing the most powerful man in town, as if he were an unimportant piece of furniture. "Arthur," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I came to ask you a question. That photograph you have in the window, the one of the bakery from 50 years ago, with my grandfather standing out front. It's beautiful." "Thank you, Sarah. It was a fine day," I said. "It was," she agreed. "And I was wondering, if you have an extra copy, could I perhaps display it in my own shop window? I think my customers would love to see it." The air crackled with tension. Leo stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. This was not some nostalgic old woman clinging to the past. This was Sarah Gable, the young, successful and deeply respected business owner, the symbol of the town's thriving future, publicly aligning herself with my silent protest. She was choosing memory over modernization, legacy over profit. Her simple request was a profound act of defiance, a clear signal that the heart of the town was not with the mayor and his bulldozers. It was here, in this dusty old shop, with the ghosts in the photographs. Leo stared at her, then at me. He saw no fear in my eyes, only a quiet resolve, now mirrored in Sarah's. He had come here to intimidate a lonely old man. Instead, he found a movement. Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked out, the bell above the door marking his retreat with a sharp, almost mocking chime. The alliance was no longer silent, and it was no longer just mine. The silence Leo left in his wake was filled with a new kind of energy. Sarah looked at me, a determined sparkle in her eye. "Well," she said, a small smile playing on her lips, "that was interesting." I simply nodded, a feeling of gratitude welling up inside me that was too deep for words. She understood. "Meet me at the bakery before I open tomorrow," she said. "I'll have coffee ready. I think we need to talk." The next morning, the bakery was a haven of warmth and the heavenly scent of baking bread. Sarah sat me down at a small table by the window, a steaming mug of coffee in my hands. "What he's doing to my grandmother, to the others." "It's wrong, Arthur," she said, her voice a mixture of anger and sadness. "People are scared. They feel powerless. Your photographs, they're reminding us that we weren't always this way. They're giving us a little bit of our courage back." She explained that after our encounter with the mayor, she had spent the evening speaking with other business owners on the historic square. The sentiment was the same everywhere. A deep love for the town's heritage, coupled with a real fear of the mayor's tactics. They admired what I was doing, but were too afraid to join me openly. "A silent protest is beautiful, Arthur," she said, leaning forward, her passion evident. "But silence can be ignored. What if we gave the town's memory a voice? What if we did more than just show the past? What if we celebrated the present?" She proposed an idea, simple yet brilliant. In 2 weeks, the town was due to have its annual summer festival, an event that had become a generic affair with food trucks and loud music. "What if," she suggested, "we, the historic businesses, reclaim a part of it? We could organize a heritage walk, Each of our shops could have a display just like yours. We could tell our stories. We'll show people that we aren't dusty relics. We are living history. It was a perfect plan, a positive act of celebration, not aggression. It was a craftsman's approach. We weren't tearing anything down. We were restoring something beautiful. I agreed immediately. As Sarah began to sketch out a list of shop owners to contact, a thought sparked in my mind, a memory connected to the old town charter hidden away in the centenary clock. "Sarah," I interrupted gently, "did you know that the summer festival originally started as something else? It was called Founders' Day." She looked up from her notepad, intrigued. "I've heard the name, but I don't know much about it." "It was the day the town was officially chartered," I explained. "It was the most important day of the year. It fell out of fashion sometime in the 70s, replaced by the more modern festival." I excused myself and walked back to my shop, a sense of urgency in my steps. I retrieved the brass key, my heart beating a little faster. Back at the bakery, with Sarah watching in silent curiosity, I told her about the clock, its secret compartment, and the document it held. Her eyes widened in amazement. Together we walked to the town square, now quiet in the early morning light. I opened the small hidden panel at the clock's base, the mechanism clicking softly, a sound only a watchmaker could love. I carefully lifted out the heavy parchment, its edges brittle with age. We carried it back to the bakery and unrolled it carefully on a large, flour-dusted table. The calligraphy was elegant, the ink faded, but still clear. We scanned the document, its formal language a testament to a more deliberate time. And then we found it. It was a clause, written in plain, unambiguous script, detailing the responsibilities of the town's leadership on Founders' Day. The clause stated that as a perpetual condition of the town's charter, the sitting mayor was required to perform a public reading of the Preservation Covenant, the very section protecting the historic square, at noon on Founders' Day, to reaffirm the town's commitment to its own legacy. The tradition had been forgotten for 50 years. Leo, in his rush to build the future, had neglected to read the instructions from the past. Our Heritage Walk was no longer just a charming community event. We now had a way, enshrined in the town's most sacred document, to compel Mayor Leo Thompson to stand in front of the entire town and, with his own voice, read the very words that would make his plaza an impossibility. The quiet watchmaker and the young baker had found the master gear that could regulate the entire machine. The days that followed were filled with a quiet, purposeful energy. Sarah was a whirlwind of gentle efficiency. With a copy of the charter in hand, she became the ambassador for our cause. I would watch from my shop as she moved from one business to the next, the old bookshop, the family-run hardware store, the small tailor's shop, her presence a calm reassurance. One by one, the other owners of the historic square, who had been paralyzed by fear, began to thaw. The idea of the Heritage Walk, combined with the undeniable authority of the Founders' Day clause, gave them a safe and powerful way to stand their ground. They were not protesters. They were participants in a tradition, guardians of a legacy. Small posters, elegantly designed by Sarah with a sketch of the centenary clock, began to appear in shop windows, announcing the first Founders' Day Heritage Walk in 50 years. My role was quieter. I became the keeper of the story. The other shop owners would come to my shop, sometimes alone, sometimes in small groups. They brought with them their own histories, old photographs, dusty ledgers, faded newspaper clippings. We would sit around my workbench, and they would tell me the stories of their parents and grandparents, of how their businesses had weathered wars, recessions, and the changing tides of the modern world. My shop transformed from a place of quiet solitude into the heart of a living museum, the unofficial headquarters of a town rediscovering its own memory. I felt a sense of connection I hadn't felt in years, a feeling of being a part of something larger than myself. Yet as the day grew closer, a private anxiety began to surface within me. I am a man who has lived his life behind a magnifying loupe, finding comfort in the small, contained world of gears and springs. The thought of standing in the public square, of being the focal point of this movement, was daunting. I was the keeper of the clock, the guardian of the charter. The responsibility of it all weighed heavily on me in the quiet hours of the night. What if I failed? What if my quiet ways were not enough to stand against Leo's loud ambition? I would sit in my armchair, the old charter resting on the table beside me, its words a heavy promise. If stories that make us reflect on the strength we carry inside also resonate with you, consider subscribing. Together, we are creating a space to listen and learn from the journeys that life presents. The twist arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 1 week before the festival. It was delivered not with a threat, but with a glossy, full-page advertisement in the local newspaper. Mayor Leo Thompson, it seemed, had caught wind of our plans. The ad announced with great fanfare a special groundbreaking ceremony for the new Plaza of the Future. It was to be held on the same day as our Heritage Walk, at the exact same time, noon. The advertisement was slick and professional. It promised a vision of prosperity with architectural renderings of a shimmering glass plaza. It also announced a special guest. A celebrity architect from the city would be in attendance to unveil the final designs. It was a shrewd and calculated move. Leo could not legally stop us from reading the charter, but he could try to make it irrelevant. He was staging a battle for the town's attention, a duel of narratives. On one side, our quiet celebration of the past, culminating in the reading of a forgotten document. On the other, his dazzling promise of the future, complete with the celebrity and the symbolic turning of the first soil. He was forcing the people of the town to make a choice, not with a vote, but with their feet. Would they gather at the old centenary clock to honor their history, or would they flock to the edge of the square to applaud the demolition of it? The air in town grew thick with a new kind of tension. Our quiet movement had been drawn into the open. The stage was set for a confrontation, not of anger and shouts, but of presence and principle. The hands of the great clock were moving steadily toward the hour of decision. In the final days leading up to the Founders' Day festival, the town held its breath. Leo's marketing machine was in full force. Brightly colored posters showcasing the Plaza of the Future appeared on every lamppost, their glossy sheen a stark contrast to our simple, historical notices. The local newspaper ran a front-page interview with Mayor Thompson, where he spoke glowingly of progress and revitalization, dismissing any opposition as a small group of people afraid of change. He never mentioned me by name, but his words were aimed squarely at my quiet corner shop. The division in the town became a palpable thing. You could feel it in the way people spoke to each other at the bakery, their voices hushed. Some were seduced by Leo's vision, dreaming of the prosperity the new plaza might bring. Others would give me a silent, supportive nod as I passed, their eyes conveying a hope that I could not let falter. Sarah told me that a few of the shopkeepers were getting nervous, wavering under the pressure of the mayor's slick campaign. Our resolve was being tested. I found my own solace, where I always had, in my work. The day before the festival, I was doing a final check on the centenary clock when I noticed something I hadn't seen in years. High up on the wall of the old town hall, the building my shop was attached to, was another, much smaller clock. It was a beautiful old timepiece with a faded Roman numeral face, its hands frozen at 3:15. It had been still for as long as I could remember. A forgotten heartbeat in a building that had become purely administrative. I felt a sudden, deep conviction. That clock needed to run again. It needed to be a part of the day. I spent the entire day on a tall ladder, my old tools in hand, much to the curiosity of passers-by. I opened the clock's housing, the smell of dust and dormant metal filling the air. Inside, the mechanism was a delicate marvel, clogged with the grime of decades, but otherwise unharmed. As I worked, cleaning each tiny gear, oiling each pivot, I felt a deep sense of peace. I wasn't just repairing a clock, I was mending a piece of the town's soul, preparing it to chime once more. That evening, back in my shop, surrounded by the gentle ticking of my restored patient, a thought nagged at me. The celebrity architect. Leo had made a great show of his name, Alistair Finch. The name felt familiar, but I couldn't place it. Driven by a hunch I couldn't explain, I pulled out the old ledgers from the library archives once more, along with my own father's meticulous journals. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I scanned the names of the craftsmen who had built the town square, the suppliers, the artisans. And then I saw it. It wasn't the name Alistair Finch that was in the records. It was the name of the master carpenter who had designed and built the beautiful, intricate woodwork on all the historic storefronts, my own included. His name was Elias Finch, Alistair Finch's father. My heart began to beat faster. I cross-referenced the name with old newspaper articles from the city. I found an interview with Alistair Finch from a few years ago where he spoke of his greatest inspiration, his late father, a humble but brilliant carpenter who had taught him that a building without a soul is just a box. He spoke of his father's work in small towns, of the pride he took in creating things that were both beautiful and enduring. A cold realization washed over me. Leo, in his cynical quest for a famous name to endorse his project, had unknowingly chosen the one man in the world who had a deep personal connection to the very history he was planning to destroy. A new, critical question hung in the air, more important than any legal clause. Did Alistair Finch know? Did he have any idea that he was being used to promote the demolition of his own father's legacy? Or was he too a victim of Leo's deceit? The game had changed. The confrontation was no longer just between me and my former apprentice. A new, powerful, and entirely unpredictable piece was now on the board. And I had a feeling that the chimes of the old clocks were about to signal a very interesting turn of events. The morning of Founders' Day dawned with an unnerving stillness. A low-hanging mist clung to the town square, muffling the sounds of the festival preparations. My hands felt stiff as I wound the clocks in my shop, each tick a countdown to the noon showdown. Sarah came by early, her usual bright energy dimmed by a shadow of anxiety. "The stage for the groundbreaking is huge, Arthur," she said, peering out the window. "They've set up a sound system. Ours is just, well, you and the clock." Her words hung in the air, a tacit admission of how outmatched we seemed. The crisis arrived not with a bang, but with a broadcast. At 9 a.m., not the local radio station, the one that usually played cheerful morning music, broke in with a special announcement from the mayor's office. It was Leo's voice, smooth, confident, and utterly devastating. "Good morning," he began. "On this historic Founders' Day, I have a truly special announcement. As we prepare to break ground on our new plaza of the future, we are not erasing our history, we are celebrating it." There was a dramatic pause. Our esteemed guest, the world-renowned architect Alistair Finch, is not just here as a visionary for our future, but as a connection to our past. Many of you may not know this, but his own father, the great craftsman Elias Finch, helped build the very heart of our town. Therefore, in honor of this legacy, I am proud to announce that our new civic space will be officially named the Elias Finch Memorial Plaza. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. It was a move of breathtaking political genius. In one fell swoop, Leo had stolen our narrative, co-opted our discovery, and framed his act of destruction as an act of profound respect. The public reading of the charter would now seem like a petty, legalistic squabble against a mayor who was honoring a beloved town craftsman. He had checkmated us before the game had even truly begun. The fallout was immediate. Sarah's phone began to ring incessantly. She spoke in low, pained tones. "Mr. "Henderson is pulling out," she told me, her face pale. "He says we can't win this. He says Leo is honoring Elias Finch and we'll look like we're disrespecting his memory if we protest." Another call came. The hardware store. Then the tailor. My quiet alliance, the one built on shared memory and quiet courage, was crumbling under the weight of Leo's masterful manipulation. Within an hour, it was just me and Sarah left, standing in the silence of my shop, the ticking of the clocks now sounding like a countdown to our defeat. "It's over," Sarah whispered, sinking into a chair. "He won, Arthur. He's a better politician than we are historians." I felt the heavy weight of failure settle in my chest. I had put my faith in the quiet power of the past, only to see it twisted into a marketing slogan by the loud, cynical voice of the present. I had led these good people to a fight they could not win, and now they were retreating, leaving me alone on the battlefield. The bell on the door chimed, a sound so soft it was almost lost in the gloom. It was Leo's aunt. She looked older, smaller than she had a few days ago. She walked in, clutching a small, worn, leather-bound book in her hands. She didn't say a word, but her eyes, filled with a deep, sorrowful shame, spoke volumes. She came to the counter and pushed the book towards me. "This was my brother's," she said, her voice barely audible. "Leo's grandfather. He and Elias Finch were the best of friends. They wrote to each other, even after Elias moved to the city. It was not a grand strategy, but a small human act of conscience." I opened the book. It was a personal diary. Tucked into the back was a folded, yellowed letter. The handwriting was elegant, precise. It was from Elias Finch, dated a year after the town square was completed. I read the first few lines. "My dearest friend," it began, "I hear there is talk of modernizing the square. I pray the council remembers the promise we all made. I did not build those storefronts to be monuments to myself, but to be homes for the souls of honest businesses, to be a legacy for generations of craftsmen, not a footnote to be paved over by the ambitions of a single man." The letter was not a legal document. It would mean nothing in a court of law. But it was something more powerful. It was the unvarnished truth, the moral testament of the very man Leo was now claiming to honor. My support had vanished. My plan was in tatters. All I had left was this letter, a whisper from a ghost, and I knew, in that moment of total crisis, that it would have to be enough. The ticking of the clocks in my shop sounded different now, louder, more urgent. The letter from Elias Finch lay on the counter between me and Sarah, its aged paper a stark contrast to the glossy posters of Leo's Plaza. The shame in his aunt's eyes had been a gift of conscience. But this letter, this was a weapon. A quiet one, yes, but one forged in the truth. Sarah finally broke the silence, her voice no longer defeated, but steely with new resolve. "What do we do with this, Arthur?" I looked past her, through the window, at the centenary clock standing sentinel in the square. My path had not changed. "We do exactly what we planned to do," I said. "We will hold our reading. We will honor Founders' Day as it was meant to be honored. If I have to stand there and read the charter to an empty square, I will do it. The truth deserves to be spoken, even if no one is there to listen." Sarah's face broke into a determined smile. "You won't be alone," she said, placing her hand on my arm. "I'll be there, and my grandmother will be there, and even if it's just the three of us, we will make our stand." Our choice was made. It was no longer a political strategy, it was an act of faith, but I knew the letter's true power wasn't in its words being read by me, but by the one man who could truly understand their weight. "Alistair Finch," I said. "He needs to see this, before the ceremony." We had a new, desperate mission. The clock was ticking towards noon. Sarah learned from a friend on the festival committee that Alistair Finch was scheduled to arrive for a private reception at the town hall at 11:30. That was our only window. We made a clean copy of the letter, placed it in a simple, sealed envelope, and on the front I wrote just 3 words. for Alistair Finch. We walked into the town square, and it felt like stepping into two different worlds. On the far side, a crowd was already gathering for the groundbreaking. Music played from the large speakers, and a local news crew was setting up their cameras. It was a scene of manufactured excitement. On our side of the square, near the clock, it was quiet. The few shopkeepers who had once been our allies now stood in their doorways, their faces a mixture of guilt and pity, unwilling to meet my eye. At precisely 11:30, a sleek black car pulled up in front of the town hall. Mayor Leo Thompson stepped out first, beaming, his movements broad and confident for the cameras. Then Alistair Finch emerged. He was a tall, distinguished man, with his father's kind eyes, but a more modern architectural sharpness to his features. He looked around the square, a professional curiosity on his face, as Leo guided him towards the entrance, a phalanx of aides surrounding them. There was no way to get through. It seemed hopeless, but then, just as they reached the steps of the town hall, something made Alistair stop. He paused and looked up, his gaze fixed not on the large stage or the waiting crowd, but on the small, restored clock high on the building's facade, the clock I had repaired just days before. At that exact moment, it began to chime the half-hour, its voice clear and true after decades of silence. Alistair seemed mesmerized by it. "That's a beautiful piece," he said to Leo, his voice carrying in a lull in the music. "A classic regulator, remarkable condition." Leo, caught off guard, glanced up dismissively. "An old relic? We're putting a digital display on the new plaza," he said, trying to steer Alistair inside. But the architect remained, his eyes studying the clock's craftsmanship. This was my chance. It was the opening, the slight hesitation in the machinery of Leo's plan. I walked forward, not with the urgency of a protester, but with the steady, unhurried pace of an old man. The aides moved to block me, but Alistair, seeing me approach, raised a hand to stop them. Leo's face darkened as he saw me. I stopped before Alistair Finch. I did not speak of plazas or politics. I simply looked at him and said, "I am Arthur, the town watchmaker. I repaired that clock. I believe this belongs to you." I held out the plain white envelope. Alistair looked from me to the envelope, his brow furrowed in curiosity. Leo tried to intervene. "Arthur, this is not the time." But Alistair ignored him. He took the envelope from my hand, his fingers brushing mine. His eyes held mine for a moment, and in them I saw not the celebrity architect, but the curious soul of a craftsman. "Thank you," he said quietly. Just then, Leo's aide whispered urgently in his ear, and with a final puzzled glance at me, Alistair was ushered inside the town hall, the sealed envelope now in his coat pocket. I had made my move. The letter had been delivered. The choice was no longer just mine. The 5 minutes leading up to noon felt longer than the 50 years I had kept the clock secret. Sarah and I stood by its great mahogany base, a small island in a sea of empty cobblestones. Across the square, the crowd at Leo's event was substantial. I could see the bright, optimistic faces, the local news camera panning across them, capturing the manufactured energy. From the stage, Leo's amplified voice boomed, thanking everyone for their belief in a bold new future. He was a master showman, painting a picture of prosperity that was hard to resist. Beside me, Sarah's grandmother, Mrs. Gable, stood holding a single perfect rose from her garden. A few other elderly residents, including Mr. Henderson, had quietly shuffled over, their faces grim but resolute. We were a handful of ghosts against a legion of the future. Then the first chime of noon rang out from the centenary clock. It was a deep, resonant sound, a note of pure, unwavering truth that cut through the tinny music of Leo's event. One by one, the chimes counted the hour. By the 6th chime, a few heads in Leo's crowd had turned, their curiosity piqued by the old, familiar sound. By the 12th chime, a quiet anticipation had settled over our small corner of the square. Leo, seeing his moment, stepped up to a ceremonial podium where a golden shovel lay on a bed of velvet. He introduced Alistair Finch with a flourish, calling him a visionary who, like his esteemed father, believes in building legacies. I took a deep breath. It was time. I opened the heavy parchment of the charter, its words a silent army waiting for their commander. My voice, unamplified, felt small in the vast square. On this Founders' Day, I began, my words steady, we are here to honor a tradition long forgotten. We are here to read the covenant of our town's founders. I started to read the elegant, archaic script, my voice gaining strength with each word about community, trust, and the sacred duty to preserve our shared home for future generations. A few more people from the edge of Leo's crowd drifted closer, drawn by the simple gravity of the moment. Leo, seeing the slight shift in attention, motioned for the music to be turned up, a petty attempt to drown me out. He began his own speech, his voice a loud counterpoint to my quiet reading. The square was now a battlefield of sounds, of two opposing ideas of what a town should be. The tension was unbearable. It felt as though we were losing, my words swallowed by his power. And then, at the peak of this tension, the heavy oak doors of the town hall swung open. Alistair Finch stepped out. He was alone. In his hand was the white envelope, now opened, and the single yellowed page of his father's letter. He paused on the steps, his eyes scanning the divided square. He looked at Leo, now faltering in his speech, and then he looked at me, still reading from the charter. His face was unreadable, a mask of calm professionalism. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he would walk to the stage, endorse Leo, and our cause would be lost forever. But he didn't. He descended the steps and began to walk, his steps deliberate and sure. He walked past the edge of Leo's crowd, past the news cameras which now swiveled to follow him, and he walked directly towards our small, huddled group at the base of the clock. A murmur rippled through the square. Leo's speech died in his throat. The music sputtered and stopped. Every eye in the town of Harmony Creek was now fixed on the three of us. The watchmaker, the architect, and the great clock that bound our histories together. Alistair stopped in front of me. He looked at the charter in my hands, then at his father's letter. He nodded, a gesture of profound respect. A news reporter, sensing the shift, rushed forward with a microphone. "Mr. Finch," she asked, "what are your thoughts on this historic day for the town?" Alistair looked not at the reporter, but at the crowd, his voice clear and carrying, unaided by any microphone. "Mayor Thompson speaks of honoring my father, Elias Finch, by naming a plaza after him," he began, his voice ringing with a quiet authority that dwarfed Leo's earlier bluster. "But I have here a letter from my father, and in it he speaks not of plazas, but of principles." He held up the letter. He wrote that his legacy was not in having his name on new buildings, but in the enduring work of his hands, like the facades on these shops. He gestured towards the historic square. He believed his work was meant to be a home for generations of craftsmen, not a footnote to be paved over. "To truly honor Elias Finch," he said, his eyes finding mine, "is to protect his work, not to tear it down." The absolute silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The silence in the square broke not into anger, but into a wave of quiet, profound applause. It started with Mrs. Gable, then Sarah, then spread through the crowd like a slow, rising tide. It was an applause not for a victory, but for a truth finally spoken. Mayor Leo Thompson stood on his stage, a solitary figure under the harsh lights, his plaza of the future crumbling into dust around him. The news camera, which had been his tool of triumph, now felt like an instrument of his public humiliation. He turned and walked off the stage without another word, his retreat far more telling than any speech. That evening, a gentle rain washed the town clean. Alistair Finch came to my shop, the scent of wet cobblestones clinging to his coat. We sat in a comfortable silence for a long time, the ticking of the clocks a gentle conversation between us. "My father would have liked you, Arthur," he said finally, his eyes on the great centenary clock. "You both understood that some things are meant to last." He walked over to the clock, running his hand over the polished mahogany. As an architect, he saw the world with a different set of eyes. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary," he murmured, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings. "The balance is perfect, but there's something. My father's maker's mark is on the right side of the dial. He always placed it on the left, unless—" His voice trailed off, his eyes alight with a sudden professional curiosity. He saw something I had looked at for 60 years but had never truly seen. He pointed to a tiny, almost invisible seam in the decorative paneling on the opposite side of the charter compartment. "Unless that one," he said, pointing to the known maker's mark, "is a decoy." This was it. The final, biggest plot twist. A secret, hidden within a secret. My heart hammered against my ribs. Using the tip of a fine watchmaker's tool, I pressed the seam Alistair had indicated. There was a soft, satisfying click, and a section of the paneling swung inward, revealing a second, deeper compartment I never knew existed. My own father had built a legacy beyond the one he had shared with me. Inside, resting on faded velvet, was not a single document, but a heavy, leather-bound ledger and a deed of trust. The title on the deed read, "The Harmony Creek Preservation Trust." We carefully lifted the ledger onto my workbench. The first page contained the handwriting of the town's founders, including my grandfather and Elias Finch. They had created not just a charter, but a perpetual financial trust. They had pooled a portion of their initial earnings from their crafts, watchmaking, carpentry, baking, and invested it with the strict, legally binding instruction that the fund was to be used exclusively for the maintenance, preservation, and beautification of the historic town square for all generations to come. We turned the pages, our hands trembling slightly. The trust had been managed silently by a state solicitor for over a century, growing with every passing year, untouched and forgotten. The final page, a recent statement, showed the current value of the trust. The town wasn't just solvent, it was wealthy. It possessed a hidden fortune, a legacy of foresight from its founding craftsmen, specifically intended to prevent the very thing Leo was trying to do. The irony was staggering. Leo's frantic search for outside investment, his bullying of the town's elders, his entire political platform, it was all based on a false premise. He had been trying to build a future by destroying the past, all while the past itself held the key to a far richer and more authentic future. The town didn't need a glass plaza. It had the means to restore every historic building, to repave the cobblestones, to become a jewel of preservation, a true testament to the craftsman who built it. Alistair Finch looked at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. "It seems my father and I have a project to work on after all," he said. "A real one, a restoration. I'll draw up the plans myself, pro bono. It will be my true tribute to him." The story of the watchmaker who saved the town became a quiet legend. But the truth was, it wasn't me who saved it. It was the wisdom of the past, waiting patiently in the heart of a clock for the right moment to chime. My shop remains, its clocks ticking in harmony, and I, the old watchmaker, have found a new purpose. I am no longer just a keeper of moments, but a guardian of a legacy, a living reminder that the best way to move forward is to understand, with profound respect, where you have come from. The future, I have learned, is not a destination you build by erasing what came before. It is a memory you choose to carry forward.